Hello. Welcome to episode number 65 of CXO-Talk. I'm Michael Krigsman, and I am here with my very friendly co-host, Vala Afshar. Vala.
Michael, second CXO-Talk in 1 week.
In 1 week. We had a good time down in Washington with the Deputy CIO of the White House and the CIO of the FCC.
Dr. J and Dr. Bray.
Dr. J, Dr. Bray, and we call you Dr. Dre. And today we're joined by an old friend of CXO-Talk for his second appearance, Dion Hinchcliffe, who is the Chief Strategy Officer of the world, and what more narrowly of a consulting company that he started called Ajuvie. Hey, Dion.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to this.
Dion, could you share with our audience a little bit about your background and your company?
Sure. I'm a Chief Strategy Officer at Ajuvie, and also I read a lot about cutting-edge topics on IT, around digital transformation, social business, open APIs, basically everything that organizations are looking to do to move themselves into the future, so future work and things like that. I've written a couple books on the subject, and at Ajuvie, I work with the leadership teams of Fortune 500 and Global 2000 firms to figure out how to get their organizations ready for the very near future.
So Dion, when we talk about digital business transformation, I'm always trying to figure out what that means, because it seems like whoever you ask, they have their own definition, and we kind of make it up as we go. So give us a sense of what does digital business transformation actually mean?
Yeah, great question. And so I think this is a really important topic to understand precisely what we mean. And I think it's clear that in the last 40 years, IT has revolutionized business. But it's done that by largely digitizing what we've already done. All right? So we've had bricks and mortar companies apply IT to what they were already doing, and they might create an e-commerce site on the side, but we've seen very few traditional businesses, even though they've digitized successfully their existing businesses, to move into the new digital space where digital is how they get their business done and is eventually become their primary mode of business. And so most businesses have digitized, but they haven't transformed.
This week you had a keynote presentation at CIO Magazine's CIO Perspectives Conference in Virginia, and the title of your presentation was Beyond the CIO-CMO Partnership and the Rise of the Chief Digital Officer. And in your presentation, you cited CDO Club and the statistics around chief digital officers around the world, and you noted that in 2012 there were 225 CDOs around the world, last year 448 CDOs, but we will exit most likely this year with well over 1,000 chief digital officers. So as we talk about digital business transformation, I had a sense that you were talking to an audience of CIOs hinting that possibly digital transformation in the enterprise will be led by the CDO. Is that where you see, who's going to champion digital transformation in business?
Well, I think CIOs want to be that champion. The problem is that there's just too much to do today. If you look at the full digital landscape, if you look at everything from mobile enablement and getting social media going and getting on board the cloud, reconciling the legacy IT portfolio, working with big data, doing all the integration between those systems, the infrastructure alone is, even at the very top of an organization, it's a full-time job, and there's business continuity. And so I think with the CIO so focused on running the business, how do they change the business? And so I think CEOs are looking at the CDO role as something that say, take our digital assets, take our existing business, and transform it. And that is your primary job. That is your responsibility. You have no distractions, and we can move very quickly, because the data shows that organizations want to move now. It's clear that the time is ticking on the industrial organization. And so that's why I think we've seen the number of CDOs doubling every year since 2012.
So really what you're saying, in effect, even though you haven't used the term, is that digital business transformation is or in effect requires a business model change. And if we think about business model change, to me, that generally does not fall inside the Chief Information Officer's domain. It doesn't fall inside the Chief Marketing Officer's domain. So how can this digital transformation and business model change take place when effectively it falls outside the scope of each of these silos?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And if you look at the study that the CDO Club did, is that most chief digital officers are getting their own P&L for digital. That's very different. The CIO doesn't have that. In fact, at CIO Perspectives, I asked the audience, does anyone here treat IT as a profit center? And as you might recall, nobody raised their hands. I even asked them, how many of you, do your business partners eagerly reach out to you for help? And only one person raised their hand. And I think we really see this disconnect between IT and the business, and the Chief Digital Officer really is going to connect all those silos, use existing digital assets, use existing IT infrastructure, and then create new lines of business.
You had noted in your talk that evidence shows that the industrial age model of the enterprise is on a widespread decline, and that we're essentially failing to properly employ the most important bridge to the future, that being technology. And then you also gave some sage advice to CIOs regarding CDO function. You told them, why don't you hire one? CIOs, go and hire yourself a digital champion and put them in IT reporting to you. But what was also interesting is you gave an example of companies where CIOs and CMOs are working closely together to seize on the opportunity of digital, and you used, I believe, T-Mobile as an example. Can you talk a little bit about your research of T-Mobile and what they did?
Sure. It's one of my favorite case studies. And this was a story of a couple years ago when T-Mobile was in real trouble, and they're doing much better now, and largely because of this effort. And so one of the things that we say is that traditional IT organizations move too slowly and they don't partner well with the CMO. And I just wanted to highlight the fact that despite many organizations hiring CDOs, we still do see organizations coming together cross-silo and delivering results. And the idea was T-Mobile connected a big data system, connecting their 33 million CRM records with what customers were actually saying about, I'm going to leave T-Mobile. When my contract is up, I want an iPhone, because T-Mobile didn't have the iPhone back then. And then they would tweet out the picture of them with their new iPhone and being over at AT&T or Verizon, who were the two big leaders. And what they did is they credited a just-in-time marketing campaign that would correlate with these customers that were going through that progression of complaining about the service and then announcing that they had left, and creating a real-time marketing campaign once they could identify who they were. And it basically cut customer defections in half in 90 days. So that's an extraordinary result. Then that combines social media and big data and a partnership between the CIO and the CMO. And I think it's just a great example showing that there are multiple ways to get to solving these problems. The Chief Digital Officer is one important one that seems to be going very popular, but we are seeing organizations becoming more agile in the way that they use IT and more cross-silo.
So you're basically saying, in effect, again, that, and I apologize, it seems like I keep putting words in your mouth, Dion.
What you meant to say, Dion.
Yeah, Dion, what you meant to say is that the role of the Chief Digital Officer, in effect, is silo busting.
Yeah, right.
Oh, that's good.
Silo busting with a P&L hanging around their neck. I mean, that's the thing, is that the Chief Digital Officer has to make the organization money. And that's not something that people have traditionally gone to the IT department for. And it requires, I think, a different entrepreneurial mindset. And the CDO is much more entrepreneurial, and I think that the average CIO is much more operations focused.
You produced a slide share, which was essentially your presentation at the CIO Perspectives, and just a few stats about it that I want to share with our audience. By the way, thousands of views in just a couple of days, so I encourage you all to go to SlideShare and look at Dion's latest SlideShare that talks about digital business transformation, the role of the CDO. But era of unprecedented change. So lifespan of S&P 500, 2013, 15 years. 2020, 9 years. Portion of digital natives in the workforce, 2013, 35%. 2020, 75%. Speed at which data in an enterprise doubles, 2 years in 2013, 3 months at the end of this decade. And an important, really important data point you had in this unprecedented change slide was percentage of IT under CIO control. 2013, 66%, 2020, 10%. So are we in agreement with, I mean, are the Gartners and IDCs and Forresters of the world agree that 90% of IT control and budget technology spend will be somewhere else at the end of the decade?
Well, far be it for me to ever say that they would get something wrong, but I mean, those are their numbers, right? We see that 10 years ago, shadow IT was only about 20% of organizations, and right now it's right about a third. A third of IT is not under IT control, and that's darn near the halfway point. We're close to the point where most IT is already not under IT control, and in some organizations that's actually true. And I talk to CIOs all the time who say our business units often can't wait for us to solve their problems. They go to external providers. As much as I don't like that, that's what we have to do to keep the business moving forward. And so I think we're seeing this technology is infusing every part of the business, and one central and relatively small support group can't possibly support the entire technology needs of the business. I think that's just reality. And so we're seeing that edge IT, which is people pulling things from app stores, using software as a service, onboarding themselves for non-mission critical IT, is becoming the norm. That's just reality. And so I think those numbers hold up. If you plot the current trend forward, that's what's going to happen.
So what's the implication for the CIO in this scenario, in which the nature of IT, well, I was going to say the nature of IT is changing, but in reality there are two levels that are going on simultaneously. Number one is you have the continuation of the traditional infrastructure IT, because after all, the phone systems do need to work and the internet lines do need to be operational and so forth. But at the same time, you have IT has to be adapting and transforming itself to respond to the expectations of its users.
Yeah.
So what's a CIO to do?
Well, I mean, we've seen the same story happen over and over again in the technology, is that the value continues to move up the stack. And if you're mired in the infrastructure issues, the plumbing of technology in your organization, and that's what the CIO is spending a lot of time on. Security, for example, has become sexy again. With privacy issues and all of these data breaches. We were talking, I think you and I, Michael, that the board of directors of Target, I think it was 7 of them lost their jobs over a data breach. These are business people losing their jobs over IT. And so infrastructure becomes its central focus. Yet, if you look back at the day when telephones came in, people don't invite the PBX guy to their business strategy meetings. The CIO, if they really want to stay relevant, has to move up the stack. And I've actually asked and talked with a lot of CIOs who see IT splitting into 2 pieces: the tactical infrastructure and the strategic aspects that really seems to be moving to the chief digital officer's purview.
Saul Kaplan just commented, full value of digital starts by changing your lens from current business model to customer job to be done. Do you agree with that?
If I understand what he's saying, yes, I think that's exactly right. Right now, IT has gotten very good at doing things like our systems of record. The ERP, the CRM, the HRM, all of those 3-letter acronyms for systems, we've pretty much got down. But it's the engagement with the customer, which is the most important thing, and our engagement with our suppliers, and scaling that up and making it effective. Our millions of customers want to talk and engage with us now, and we don't have a good organizational structure to do that, the right tools and technologies. We're starting to with things like social, but the world now really wants to get into our business, and we have to support that if you want to hold them close as customers.
So, is that the biggest challenge for CXOs, engaging at scale when you have all these fragmented channels?
Well, I think it's those 2 things. It's channel fragmentation is a huge problem, because there's new channels coming out weekly, it seems like, and they're all relevant to your business. They are all relevant to your business. And when your competitor can figure it out faster than you can, you start losing the game. But yeah, it's a scale problem. The IT department is a small support unit, and it has to support the entire workforce, which are all interested in basically rolling out 10 to 100 times more technology than you have today. They're helping themselves to apps out of the App Store, right? They're helping themselves to data and apps out of the cloud. They're trying to get their jobs done with the right tools. The millennials, we see that they don't ask for permission, they just do this. And the customer is the same thing. If you're not willing to talk and engage with them in their channels in the manner they prefer, they go until they find someone that they do. They go shopping around. And the scale, when you have millions of customers and a small marketing department and a small tech department, what do you do? That's the challenge.
So there's a piece that, if I put on my CIO hat again here, there's a piece that I find very confusing, Dion, which is this, that essentially you're telling me adapt IT, adapt, as you called it, these edge technologies and so forth, but immediately the conversation shifts to changing culture. And so I'm running an IT shop, and I'm responsible for technology, and you're talking to me about changing culture. Well, come on. I'm trying to run an IT shop. And why are you talking to me that my job is about changing culture?
Adaptability, the sign of intelligence.
So what are you talking about?
Well, I mean, this is the issue of if we're talking about the highest growth companies in the United States, other than like energy firms and pharmaceuticals, are internet companies. The United States is throwing off these $100 billion new companies all the time. You know, the Facebook and Twitter, the new ones. That's not happening in the rest of the world. And we see the high growth businesses are coming out of digital, right? You look at the valuation of Airbnb, for example, and Uber. You know, these are great stories, and they're coming out of organizations that are technology companies. Their business is technology, but connected to the real world in some way. And so maybe the IT department isn't in charge of culture change to make most companies a technology company, because I will say it right now, every company has to become a technology company, or they may take a long time to die, but they won't survive. And so how do you shift that culture to make them technology companies? Perhaps the IT department is the only one in the organization who actually has a sense of that, and I'm not even sure that's 100% clear. Most IT departments aren't like the technology companies we see in the startup space. And so this is why we see, you know, Vala was mentioning that chart about, you know, the average S&P 500 company is only lasting about 15 years, and that's about to drop to 9 in the next 5 years, because that culture change is so hard, Michael. You're absolutely right. The IT department probably isn't going to do it, and that means the writing is on the wall.
Well, we have a comment from Andy Karabutis, who is the CIO of Dell. And here's what she says. She says that this split only takes place, now quote, if CIOs aren't on top of their game. Well, she says, only if CIOs aren't on top of their game does IT split into operations and innovation. IT must innovate or perish.
I totally agree with her.
She's saying there is no split.
But the thing is, there will be a split in organizations that aren't well organized for change. Right. So when they can't get organized, they have to split it off from the operations group, split the digital expertise off into another unit under the CDO. But I agree with you, and this is the point I made. I agree with her. This is the point I made at CIO Perspectives, that the CIO has a chance to lead digital change, hire that CDO, keep innovation inside that unit, and drive that culture change. But I don't think it's likely in many organizations.
Sure. Well, as we talked about adaptability and the right culture to be able to transform your business to a technology business, in your presentation you talked about perfect storm of tech change all happening essentially at the same time, 2010 to present day. Touch UI, App Store, smart mobile, cloud, social business, consumer IT, business intelligence, big data. And of course now everything is going to have an IP address. The Internet of Things, Internet of Everything. How can a CIO or a CMO deal with not only all these incredible megatrends, but now on top of it, you have the glass and the watch and the sensors and this whole ecosystem of connected things?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the answer is pretty simple. It's what's happening in the consumer space. How is the consumer world absorbing all of this change, all of this technology? And it's doing it by empowering individuals. And so this is going to be a hard concept, I think, for the IT department, but we do see those that are successful there are some large companies that are successful at doing this, is basically in the future, in the near future, everyone is in the IT department. That's why there's that 90% figure of enterprise IT being outside of IT control. Everyone is in the IT department in the future organization, and they're responsible for data security, and they're responsible for governance. They have guardrails clearly put in place by the IT department. The IT department has to enable broad adoption and metabolism of all of this new technology, and it does that by putting everyone in charge of applying technology to their part of the business. And IT is there for guardrails and security and governance.
I don't know, Dion. That's the notion.
But that's the trend. If you look at what's happening, that's what's happening.
Wow. So then, what is the role of IT and the CIO? I mean, we're still going to have an IT department, right?
Well, I think that the CIO will still run core IT, like key record-keeping systems, and probably the larger systems of engagement. But we're talking about all that edge stuff, all the productivity apps. There's all these micro apps. There's the perfect app for the job. It has maybe 1, 2, or 3 features, and you want to use it and throw it away. Disposable IT. I think this is what you see happening right now. I mean, I look at my phone. I got 260 apps on it, many of which I've only used a couple times to get something done.
Wow.
And this is what people are getting used to, and they want to help themselves to. And this is why, if you plot forward the trend from 2000, which was 20% shadow IT, 33% now, actually it's probably about 40% now. And if you plot that forward to the end of the decade, that's where we are. In 20 years, IT is going to shift primarily to the rest of the organization.
I mean, is that essentially a shift of more to the front of the business, customer-facing, edge, as you said, versus burning a lot of the calories in the back office and those 3-letter ERP, CRM, and technologies that you mentioned?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And that's where all the complexity and all the channels are, right? So it's in the engagement side, which is with business partners. So B2B companies have just as big a challenge as anyone else, but your whole supply chain. But we're really seeing the supply chain story slow to happen. The big discussion is, how do I better connect to my customers in the marketplace in many more channels and to do it effectively, right? So sales, marketing, customer care, all of that. And that's going to require many more applications and many more channels than we have today.
So Dion, let's go back. I'm really intrigued with this Chief Digital Officer role that we were talking about earlier. And there's another point on which I'm confused, which is this.
You're confused a lot this episode.
I am confused all the time, pretty much. But that's why we do CXO-Talk, and we have brilliant guests such as Dion to help us out.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right,
I agree.
All right, so here's the point in which I'm confused. So you're basically, in effect, so Dion, what you meant to say.
Yeah, let me hear what I meant to say.
Yet again, what you meant to say, yet again.
For someone who's confused, you keep repeating.
I'm confused, but I'm opinionated.
Yes.
Those are not in conflict. Yeah. So the Chief Digital Officer then effectively is a stopgap measure to cut across silos with P&L responsibility, as you said, and therefore, in fact, and maybe this is an unfortunate reality, but in fact, couldn't you then make the argument that the Chief Digital Officer is a lack of confidence vote on both the CIO and the CMO? Yeah,
I think that's well said. I think you've nailed it. I think the Chief Digital Officer is a dose of medicine for operational an over-focus on the operational aspects of the business. Because don't forget, the CIO only gets called on the carpet when there's a data breach, when systems go down, when things go wrong. And so IT is a nail that's been hit so hard with the operational hammer that it's utterly flat, and they don't stick their head out because they're used to everything. They don't ever get called. They're the Maytag repairman when everything's running, and so there's a tremendous focus on operations. And the Chief Digital Officer is an entrepreneur who's brought in to say, digital has to lead the business, has to provide the innovation on where the business is to go, because it's only through these new digital channels. That's the primary future for most organizations to move into the future. And I've already predicted, I think the Chief Digital Officer will go away. Once transformation has largely been achieved, it'll be reabsorbed back into IT. So IT will actually be the business. Better way of putting it.
One of the topics you covered at the conference, you noted that technology has led to an era of unprecedented productivity. And in one of our previous CXO-Talk shows, we had John Hagel, who's the co-chair of the Center for the Edge, Deloitte. And he talked about this as a delicious paradox, where technology has increased productivity, killing some businesses and growing others. So what advice do you have to CIOs to make sure that they're not roadkill?
Well, I mean, this is the issue with technology. There's tremendous creative destruction. I mean, ever since the Industrial Revolution, every generation of technology has put a whole workforce out of business, right? So, you know, IT put the accounting business practically out of business. There used to be entire buildings full of accountants with green eye shade doing payroll by hand on green spreadsheets, right? Because there was no calculators to do it. It had to be done by hand. When computers came along, entire buildings of accountants went away, and they had to find new work. And guess what they did? They could find it in IT, working on designing and creating new accounting systems that were now digitized, right? And then accounting has been even transformed over the last few years. So what we hope, and there's still evidence to believe that even right now, all the jobs that are being changed, you know, we talked about, you know, the collaborative economy is going to put all these businesses out of business, like hotel chains and car rental and so on. But all it does is free up those people to create even more innovative new and entrepreneurial new services that we need. The evidence is that every generation for the last 200 years, we've been able to take and repurpose all of those people. And the same is true of CIOs, if you ask me. There's a tremendous amount of work ahead of us. We're only beginning the digital revolution. So I think their jobs are entirely secure, but they have to expand their notion that IT is going to become the business.
But then how do you reconcile the reality that digital transformation requires business model shift, and the focus of IT historically has been on infrastructure, but then you have Andy Karabutis from Dell, who by the way, is an extremely, extremely innovative CIO, saying that the focus of IT must be innovation. So are there any conflicts in this chain, or does it all go as one happy family?
Well, I mean, I think you have this issue. I mean, I think he's right that combining innovation and operations into one operating unit is a challenge. I mean, you think about it. They don't innately go together, right? One is much more about continuity and not changing anything and keeping it working, and the other one is about blowing everything up and coming up with radical new ideas that are going to change everything. And trying to force those into the exact same business unit, might not be the best way of doing things. And I think even inside, what I'm hearing from CIOs is that there's a natural separation of those two, even inside of IT departments. There's 20% of the IT group wants to do all new things and create new systems and lead the business, and 80% are really focused on that continuity. And it's hard to get those two groups together. And so how do you do that? And this is going to be the challenge.
If you were a CIO of the company, would you have a CIO, CDO, and a CMO, or it's reporting directly to you as the CEO, or would you put the CDO under one of the two functions, either marketing or IT or somewhere else?
Well, I think it really depends on how effective the CEO is in the technology world. The issue is that the farther that a business is from the technology industry, the harder it is to be a technology company, right? So
Right.
I think that technology companies or industries close to technology, their CEO can have the CDO report. But I think for many industries, the CEO is going to need the digital officer to report to the CIO because they're going to speak the same language.
Do you have stats from the CDO club in terms of these 1,000 CDOs in 2014? What percentage report directly to CEOs?
No, I would like to see that myself. That's a great question.
That's good. Okay.
So what are the most difficult challenges, Dion, that you see among the companies that you're talking with in terms of not just taking their existing ways of doing business and putting them on the internet, but changing how they do business? What's the hardest thing?
Well, I mean, one is just the uncomfortable topic that IT people are in that industry because they love technology, right? They're usually impassioned about it, and they're most comfortable with technology and not so comfortable, let's say, with people, right? And They also don't want to make an investment in learning the business because that's not a marketable skill for them. The latest cutting edge new technology, right? That is much more marketable, and they're much more interested in that. And so there's always been this IT business divide, and the IT people really want to focus on that, and they don't want to get too deep into the business. And the business side doesn't understand technology, doesn't know what it makes possible or how it should be transformed in their business. And this has always been the problem, and it's why digital native startups are people who understand some particular problem very, very well in the non-technology world, can bring technology and solve that problem because they have learned and internalized both of those things. So we've got to figure out how to close that gap.
So it's basically, so in effect, what you're saying is that...
to stop. I think we all get what Dion is saying. No, go ahead. Go ahead.
All right,
no,
so,
I'm kidding.
All right, so... Well, see, I'm trying to figure it out.
no. In fact, sometimes your questions bring clarity to me as well.
Oh,
so
and
please.
your questions bring, and you are a scholar and a gentleman. All right. So basically, what you're saying is, if you're over 40, you're holding back the business. Is that what I heard you say?
I don't know about that. I mean, I was something. Of course, I saw it on Twitter. Something I saw that went by that the real measure is really how tech savvy somebody is. Age doesn't matter as much as people think it does. That there are you can find plenty of millennials who don't use much of technology or who don't spend a lot of time with it, and you can find plenty of people over 50 even who are keeping up on the latest things. So I think you really need to have a tech savvy score or something to get a sense of that.
But it's still coming back, though, at the end of the day, and this is what I find fascinating, at the end of the day, it's still coming back to the need to figure out a different business model, or to put it another way, to take our existing ways of doing business and processes and change them to take advantage of the fact that we now have this engagement, this broader engagement that's possible, and then that leads very, very quickly to is our culture and our people adaptable enough to innovate, meaning think of those new changes, and then be flexible enough to follow through on execution and make the change.
Yeah,
well, and there's a timing issue. So here's one of the most important insights I have had in my career, and that is change imposed from outside tends to actually break an organization. They don't respond to it very well. There's this famous concept called the not invented here syndrome. Unless we thought of it, that's not a good thing to do. And so organizations have to disrupt themselves before it's imposed, because if it's imposed, they're gonna reject it, and it's gonna tend to break the organization. If you can, however, if you always seek out change and innovation when it happens, and that is part of the culture of your organization, then you're going to go ahead and change yourself ahead of time. And there's evidence to believe that really works. Dave Gray uncovered this. He wrote Connected Company, and he's a famous thinker in this space. He uncovered this great research from Shell that the companies that have lasted the ages, right, that have lasted centuries, the corporations that have survived countless revolutions in technology and world wars and so on that are still standing, they tend to be active seekers of change. They don't wait for it to be imposed from the outside. They do it to themselves because that's what they're seeking out and trying to adapt to the market.
So,
and they're not on that S&P 500 chart.
Sure. You wrote the book Social Business by Design, and when I think of a social business, I think of, for example, Salesforce.com and the CEO, Mark Benioff. He talks about, leaders need to adopt a beginner's mindset, open and curious and free of prejudice. So from the top down, there's this culture of seeking change, as you said. As you wrote the book Social Business by Design, do you need to design a culture where you are proactively seeking feedback and you're open to, you're holding on to your ideas lightly, so you can adapt?
I agree. Yeah, if you get overinvested, you can't change, right? And that's really the challenge. And we look at. I could sense that Michael was a bit skeptical about. I think the IT is going to be the conduit for change, and they're just going to make it safe, and they're gonna enable it. They have to get away from Dr. No, because already everyone's routing around them. You know, I think that was an amazing insight when I asked all the CIOs we had at that conference, do your business customers come eagerly to you to help them solve their problems? And none of them did. None of them. That tells me that the organization, there's dysfunction there. And the organizations are already trying to seek out other solutions to their problems. And that's the death knell for traditional IT right there. And if we hold on too closely to these ideas, we will fail.
Well, with 48,000 apps downloaded every minute and all these SaaS cloud solutions, and the fact that all of us have, essentially computers in our pockets,
yes.
I mean, ultimately, the other lines of business have higher tech IQ, digital IQ, and they perhaps have less reliance on Dr. No and the IT organization. Is that a fair statement?
Well, because they can just they can instantly provision an application that already has a data center behind it. They don't have to ask. They have options, and this is what I think. Even today, many IT leaders I talk to don't realize that they have severe competition. It's like having a second or third or fourth IT department inside the company that you can just go right to, who says, yes, of course I will give you what you want, and I'll give it to you right now, and it's not going to cost you very much, and I'll give you a great SLA. And so the cloud is, and app stores, which are also part of the cloud, that's the new IT department. That's the competitor. And until IT departments realize they're in serious competition with a new IT department that's bigger and more resourced and richer than they ever could be, then I think that they're going to continue to have problems.
But in a sense, though, isn't this whole discussion of IT as being separate and apart from the business a little bit of a red herring? Because the reality is, as Kim Stevenson, the CIO of Intel, has said, there are no IT projects, they're business projects. And so, in fact, if any part of the company, including marketing, IT, finance, and so forth, if they have their ear to the ground and they are acting in accord with what the company needs and what people are asking of them, then the shift is going to happen just as a matter of course. And in that way, IT becomes sort of an automatic innovator.
Yeah, well, I think you're quoting some really high-functioning CIOs, right?
Right. Yeah, Michael only references like 0.1%.
And also, it's easy to say those things, for a leader to say those things, but it's very difficult often to get IT to actually practice what they preach. It is. If this was easy, we wouldn't be here talking about it. Organizations, IT is challenged like it never has been before. It has more competition than it's ever had before. And the business is more seriously in need of help and leadership in that space. And I do think some organizations are going to make it through, but I think a lot of them are. I mean, this is why that graph is like it is on that S&P 500 chart. Technology is destroying companies.
Can you explain Martek's law to our audience?
Yeah, sure. I actually just came across that. I can't believe it, just a few days ago as I was getting ready for CIO Perspectives, and that basically says, technology changes exponentially, but companies change logarithmically. And what that means is that tech change even is pulling away from companies. They cannot absorb and metabolize technology as fast as it happens using their existing methods for doing so.
Wow.
So it's all about, so at the end of the day, all of this comes down to, do you have a good idea, which is innovation, and can you incorporate that idea and execute on it, even if it requires you to do your business differently?
So I've actually been involved in a number of digital transformation efforts. Let me tell you what the real problem is. The real problem is that the traditional business does not want to be threatened by the new digital business, and that they won't accept anything that will cannibalize sales from the traditional line of business, and they will do anything they can in terms of their fiefdom, and as a political issue, to prevent the digital business from affecting that line of business. And so what you have is that there's always this conflict, this battle between the traditional lines of business and the digital lines of business, because to some extent it's a zero-sum game. If business moves to the digital side, then the bricks and mortar side doesn't get credit for it, and they start shrinking, which they won't stand for. Right? Their job is to grow that side of the business. and not let anything interfere with it. And so that's really, in many organizations I go into, that's the challenge. Digital is fighting a serious headwind to grow inside the business.
Give us, all right, we have 5 minutes left. Give us some advice. Give
our CIO community that's watching some advice. If there are 3 things CIOs should do to ready themselves from what appears to be this avalanche of digital disruption, what would be the 3 things you would recommend?
Well, so for one thing, I think that that one of the most powerful tools that you have is all of the innovation on the edge of your business, and you've got to tap into that. So how can you partner with more of your lines of business and enable them and say, look, one of the best examples I have is the CTO of the Washington Post company. They just changed their name. I forget what it is, but UV Kochard. He said, look, I want your business, but if I'm not the absolute best person to give it to you, I'll actually support and enable you to go to a business partner outside. I'll make sure what you do is secure and safe and so on. Basically putting himself in direct competition with every other service provider out there, including the cloud, and saying, I want what's best for the business, right? So I will partner with you. Give me a shot at everything, right? But if I'm not the best choice, the best overall value, then it's better for the business that you go somewhere else, and I'll make that work. I will support it and embrace it.
So pro-shadow IT.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And I think that's the best for the business, because think about this. If IT has no competition, which is not true, but it didn't used to have competition, how is that going to create an efficient and effective resource? It won't, right? And it traditionally, I think, hasn't. And now the data shows that that's all changing. So that's one. I think the next piece of advice is to prepare for that, for what we call continuous change. Right now, everything is a series of projects, and we're going to focus on mobile, or we're going to focus on cloud, and then we're going to apparently stop. And we see that organizations have to adapt to a stream of continuous change. And so building a capability for adapting to a much greater rate of change is absolutely essential. And so how do you do that? Because I still run into organizations, and Michael, you know all this, the story, that are still 5 years into an ERP rollout, and they can't do anything. They can't change anything until that ERP rollout is done. And that's been one of the biggest arguments for things like the cloud, because now you're on these newer, much more agile platforms. The whole DevOps story is a great example of how we can drive much faster continuous change across the entire value chain, right? And organizations are doing this. But still, a lot of IT departments aren't looking at DevOps.
I need to very quickly inject a true story here on that point. So IT goes to the CFO of a very large company, divisional CIO, and says to that CIO, okay, we're doing a new ERP system, what are your requirements? And the CFO says, okay, here's our requirements and so forth. And IT says, great, we'll be back in touch in about 3 years.
Exactly.
So the guy, it's like, I don't even know what business we're going to be in 3 years, and you're telling me our project's going to be, is going to be done in 3 years, or it's going to take 3 years.
Yeah, and that's where this is where if you look at almost all new development of enterprise systems, it's for cloud deployments. They're using much more advanced technology that you can onboard very, very quickly, and you can change. It just doesn't give you as much differentiation, and this is the last piece of the 3 pieces, and that is focus on what is strategic to your business. Everything that can be commoditized, you can push out in the cloud, but you need to retain the pieces that are unique to your business, that makes you so powerful, and that is having a world-class data set for your business, whatever that is. We've seen in digital, whoever has the best data wins. There we go. That's the entire strategy right there. Don't outsource those pieces. Retain, and what IT should be focusing on is those aspects of differentiation. That's what makes it strategic, and they can commoditize everything else, and use the cloud, use SaaS, use app stores to provide as much IT to the rest of the organization as possible.
And in fact, if we had another hour for this show, which we don't, we were just about done, but if we had another hour, we could begin that hour on the topic of digital business transformation means data.
Yes. Oh yeah, that is the hot topic, right? The data is the golden rule. He who has the data makes the rules.
Mark Zawacki on Twitter just noted 1994, IT doesn't understand the business. 2014, the business doesn't understand IT.
There we go. I like that one.
Okay, and so we're sort of ending on this note of an identity crisis. So we started about talking. We started about talking about technology, and then we shifted from infrastructure to culture. And now we're talking about companies having an identity crisis.
They are, exactly.
This is very complicated.
It is complicated. And honestly, maybe we are asking too much of CIOs and CMOs, but such is life.
I mean, this is the thing. This is their job now. I mean, it's all of our jobs.
That's right.
Guide our companies.
And it's in fact, it's not us who are asking.
It's the market and our customers.
It's the market. It's not management that is inventing this and saying, hey, you need to do this or that, but it is the market is evolving in certain ways, and there are people who have the ability and organizations that have the ability to make this type of adaptation, and it's those forward-thinking ones who, in effect, are dragging the rest of the economy with them.
Sure.
Yes, I think that's well said. No, it's a time of crisis for business and for IT, but it's also the greatest time of opportunity. We can't forget that either.
Absolutely. This is the real time of opportunity if, in fact, you're a CIO or a CMO who knows how to embrace new business models and think about their business in business model transformation terms and culture shift adaptation terms, bringing that business model forward.
Yeah, as Michael Kale, CIO of Netflix, said on our show a few months ago, there is no better time for CIOs and IT to bolster and build positive reputation for themselves. So.
Yeah, I like that a lot. That's great.
Well, it's unfortunately, boy, this has been a very fast conversation. We could have gone on for definitely another hour.
I think so, exactly.
Easily. You have an extraordinary guest when my fingers are hurting based on the number of tweets during the last 45 minutes.
Well, you're like a tweeting machine.
No, I'm just saying that I have a good 2,000+ word blog coming out of this session, so thank you very much, Dion.
Yeah, me too. So you guys are great. I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much. You've been listening to episode number 65 with Dion Hinchcliffe, and in the coming weeks, over the next month or so, we have folks like the CIO of the General Services Administration and others who will be on the show. Hey Vala, instead of a handshake, let's do a remote fist bump.
There we go.
There you go.
See, we're even transforming the way we engage.
That's right. That's right. Systems of engagement. Okay. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you'll come back next week. And thank you to our guest, Dion Hinchcliffe, who is the Chief Strategy Officer for Ajuvi and really one of the top experts in the world on the topic of digital business transformation. Bye-bye.